in some ways, that's an instructive moment because he was genuinely baffled by what was in his chocolate chip cookie, where it came from. And let me just challenge you all. Go away and find out what's in your food. Find out what you're eating. If that old sort of, which I don't believe, but if they say you are what you eat, then we should know what we're eating. If we want to know ourselves, we should know something about what we're eating. And it's very, very difficult to find out what you're eating. Why is that? Why is it hard to find out what you're eating? What the students came back with all kinds of interesting information. And here's another piece then. What tends to happen when it turns out how difficult it is, more and more of the assignments turn out to be sort of raw product that's close to home rather than the product that most of us actually eat, which is canned and further processed and packaged product. I mean, the vast amount of grocery shelf space is not raw, unprocessed product. The vast amount of the store is full of highly processed product. But that, it turns out, is so difficult to find out where it came from, who handled it, where it went. And when students do find that out, it's an amazing story of transportation, of distances, and a lot of it, as I said, you can't even find out. The student that phoned the New York offices to see where the tomatoes on his Saturday night pizza came from, it turned out that was proprietary information. It could have been Ontario, it could have been California, it could have been Mexico, but they're not prepared to tell you. So a lot of it is proprietary information, and an astonishing, and this you know from the data too, an astonishing amount of food comes distances you would not believe. Something like 3,000 to 5,000 kilometers. Most of the food has traveled that is on your breakfast plate. What does this tell us about what we're eating? I mean, I sometimes say to people, if it is the case that you are what you eat, we actually are all those cheap little toys that have those labels, 100% unknown fiber. That's us. This is not reassuring for a philosopher who knows that knowing thyself is the key to being philosophically grounded. I mean, this is problematic. But it's problematic, but it's not coincidental. It is designed. It is organized like that, and it is specifically designed like that. Wendell Berry says, and I'll just read you this quote out of an older work of his. He says, one of the primary results and one of the primary needs of industrialism is the separation of people and places and products from their history. And that's nowhere more true than with food. We are so much separated from the places and the history of this food. And that is a primary premise of industrialization, that you desegregate and deconstruct and separate from. And that's actually what we experience when we eat, except that we're in some ways, as consumers, and let me just say, I should never say consumers. I dislike that term. Consumers, in fact, the whole language of consumption is one of eating and leaving nothing behind, or it's like fire. It moves through and consumes what it is. We are eaters. We are eaters, and we should give back and return and be in relationship to that which we eat, I always say. But as consumers, as eaters, we often don't see, we can't really tell what's wrong with the food system, because our firsthand experience is that there's a huge variety of food, in fact, an increasing variety of food. There is no scarcity. I would warn you, there's nobody in this room that has experienced real food scarcity over a long period and been provoked to think about the food system because they went hungry for a long time. I expect that most of us experience what I do, that when we walk into the grocery store, there is more and more to eat and more choices from, and more exotic choices. I mean, there's all kinds of things in the grocery store now that my mother wouldn't have recognized in her day, and my grandmother wouldn't have even recognized as food. And she was right, actually. But it masks for us any sense that there's any loss here. In fact, it makes us believe, our concrete experience lets us believe that there's more and more, a greater variety. But that masks actually what is going on biologically. That variety is very superficial. If you actually look at the data, we have fewer and fewer species and less diversity in the key foodstuffs that we eat. They tell me that something like 50% of North American apples are now 2 varieties, and that over 70% of the lettuce is actually iceberg lettuce, 1 variety. And when you look at the intensive hog operations and chicken operations, there are very, very few varieties that now actually make up the vast majority of our food system. And that's part of the industrial demand for standardization, that it all has to be the same in order to go into the industrial processing factory. It has to be uniform, it has to be reliably uniform. And the only way in which you produce the uniform and the reliably uniform is to have one kind only. I sometimes say that, you know, despite all the variety in our grocery stores, the supposed variety in our grocery stores, there was probably more genetic variety, more biological variety in most agrarian villages 2 generations ago than there is now in our grocery store, if you take account actual biological diversity. I mean, in my grandmother's time, everybody gathered their own carrot seeds and their own seeds from their garden, and they exchanged seeds. And there was probably in one area more carrot varieties than there is now in all of North America in the grocery stores. So it's a much more subtle view of diversity, but I think something that we have to think about carefully if we're actually going to restore ecological health to our food system. The health effects, of course, of the way we grow food, I mean, there's many more experts in the room on that than I am, but we all know that the effects of eating so much of a few kinds of things, peanuts I'm thinking about, eventually, corn also, eventually has effects on our health and our own well-being that we're having a real struggle trying to contain. The health in the food system, of course, I mean, I don't even have to begin to talk about that. You're all washing your hands now assiduously because we know that the intensive hog operations in some way or another are threatening us in terms of pandemics. I mean, there's much better expertise in this room, but we're all aware of it now. So it isn't as if it's surprising that this massive standardization and loss of biological diversity is having a real effect on each one of us.